Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today has an MBA in corporate finance and has been self-employed for 25 years. The father of three, he and his wife live in Concord, Massachusetts, and his book of poems, Where Inches Seem Miles, was selected by Kirkus Reviews as one of the best independent books. He was born in 1954. The year the Supreme Court mandated school desegregation, but he attended all-white public schools in his hometown of Columbus, Georgia, through sixth grade. His novel, Never, is coming-of-age story in the segregated South. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Joel Johnson.
Thank you very much.
Joel, you and I share the same birth year and life in a segregated South. But our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Yeah, we were born in 1954. 50 seems like a long time ago.
It really does.
I think that I was born wanting to write a novel. I mean, I felt like I came out of the womb and said to my mother, I want to write a novel. But if you ask me who writes novels, I'd say Charles Dickens or William Faulkner. I mean, these giants. I didn't know anyone who had ever actually written one. And so it seemed to me like just an unattainable ideal. The other thing I'd say is, you mentioned I have an MBA. I mean, one thing you learn in business school is that there are much easier ways to make money than writing novels, right? I mean, what a lousy way to make money. And so when I was 25 or 35 or 45, I had mouths to feed. You know, I had to pay for college tuition and buy the macaroni and cheese. And so I just couldn't afford to be out trying to support myself as a writer. And then I think that the other hurdle that I faced is if somebody just says to you, you know, sit down and write a novel, the question is, what are you going to write about? What are you going to say? So the way that I kind of got around all of this was I started writing poetry and participating in poetry workshops. And, you know, if it takes you years to write a novel, you can write a poem in a few hours. And if you send one out and it gets published, that's pretty gratifying. I mean, that boosts your confidence. So having that experience, I think, increased my confidence as a writer. But what really came together for me was I can remember distinctly being on a run one day, and I was thinking, man, it's kind of pathetic to be 60 years old and still wanting to write a novel. And then I thought, well, the only thing more pathetic than that is to never try. So I went home and I started writing a novel. I wrote out a scene with this very lurid situation and these characters, and none of that survived into the final novel that got published. But the good news is that I had begun. And so I just kept going at it day after day until finally ended up with a published novel.
Well, I think that's half the battle, is sitting in a seat and having persistence.
Absolutely. I had a routine where I would write at the same time every day. And I think that it's good just to have that routine where, on this day at this hour, I will be writing.
Well, tell us more about what inspired you to write that particular novel. We both lived in the South. I lived in Mississippi. You lived in Georgia. My high school was not desegregated until I was in the 10th grade. And when my class celebrated our 50th class reunion last year, both blacks and whites shared their perspectives of that time, and during which we had no control. We were just kids and teenagers and didn't know any better about a lot of things. And getting together with them and sharing just seemed like such a healing time for all of us.
Yeah, you almost can't believe that we lived through an era like that. Um, the novel is a coming of age story. And so, in a way, any coming of age story is going to be a little bit autobiographical. And my story is not an autobiographical story, but it's easy for me to imagine life in the segregated South because I lived there. And my experiences as a child are a starting point for telling this story. I think the reason that I initially decided to write about the civil rights movement was because I knew it was dramatic. I mean, my childhood was not dramatic. My memoir would be, that was the year I skinned my knee, really badly. That's about all I could say. But I knew that if I told a story about the early 60s and the changes that the South was going through, that I could have action in my story. I think another reason that this story appealed to me is that, as I just said, being older, we look back at this time and we think it's hard to believe that we lived through a time like that. Living in Concord, Massachusetts, people just cannot believe that, I grew up in the segregated South. And when you think about how we think about those white people at that time, I think there's a tendency to think those were just ignorant people or those were evil people. The problem with that is that everybody I knew participated in that segregationist society. I mean, my parents, my grandparents, my cousins, my friends, we were all part of that society. And I don't believe that I am in any way morally superior to the generation that went before me. And so I think in telling this story, one thing I was trying to do is explore the difference between an evil institution and evil people who are living in that society. And so I think that I think of it as a story that is sympathetic to all the characters, white and black, while not being sympathetic to segregation itself.
You have really summed up my thoughts about segregation and our families and what we lived through in those days. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, because we can't think of our parents and grandparents as evil and going along with something that they knew was not right. We have to, try to figure all of that out for ourselves. And I think a lot of that, comes from within us. But it was such a time in history that's so important. And I know that has inspired, your story.
One thing that Martin Luther King said in his letter from the Birmingham jail is he said, the people that are the real impediments to our movement is not the KKK, it's the white moderates. And I think this is very much a story about white moderates. And one thing that the narrator says, the narrator is an old man who's looking back on his experience as a child, is he says, I'd like to tell myself that I would have been out there marching with Martin Luther King, but my mother is the closest proxy I have to myself, and she didn't do that. And I think when he says that, he's recognizing I'm as guilty as anyone. I cannot look at myself in the mirror and say, I'm confident that I would have supported civil rights had I been in her shoes at that time.
I think that's quite chilling. And I ask myself those questions all the time. I ask myself, would I have been one of the ones to crucify Jesus? Would I have been in the crowd yelling, crucify? Would I have, treated people differently? Would I have marched with the KKK? I mean, I have to ask myself that all the time after being brought up in the South. But, I think sometimes the South gets a rap and gets blamed for everything in our country. And I think there are people throughout the country, as we saw with the busing problems in the North. There are people everywhere who should be asking themselves those same questions.
Yeah, I had a fascinating experience. I went down to North Carolina last month for a book group meeting, and everybody in this room was saying, well, so what do the people in the North think about this book? And then I'll have a book group meeting up here, and they'll say, well, what do people in the South think about this book? I think people believe there's more of a divide and more of a difference than there really is.
That's so true. We're all humans. Well, once you wrote this manuscript, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I looked for agents, and, I just never made any progress trying to go through an agent. You look at the acknowledgments in books, and the authors will talk about how helpful their agents were. For me, they were more like gatekeepers. And I think that what's happening now is that the publishing world is consolidating, and the agents are working as these gatekeepers. And a lot of writers are thinking, I'll just go through a different gate. There's now self-publishing is a possibility. Co-publishing is a possibility. What I did is I found Peter Olson at Arbitrary Press, who has sort of a co-publishing type arrangement. Peter's a successful writer. His own books went out of press. He started republishing his own books and then started publishing books for others. He's a good writer. He's a great editor. He's a contemporary. So I just had a very positive experience working with him and Arbitrary Press.
There's so many options for us today, thank goodness, because not very many people make it with the big five, and I think hybrid presses and small presses and self-publishing just opens up so many opportunities, and proof of that is how many books or titles are published in the U.S. every year. I think it's like 2 million titles. So, it's so much better, I think, to have those options. We think that we need an agent. We think that we want to, have this wild, crazy success that only the big five can bring us. But I think you sacrifice a lot, especially funding, because you get so very little if you go with one of those big houses.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that authors over 50 may define success in a different way than authors who are 20.
That's exactly right. And that's one of my questions. I always say, what does success look like to you personally?
To me, it's meeting with readers, hearing from readers, and having them say that they enjoyed the book, or that the book meant something to them and that they recommended it to their friends. So, I would like to be famous and have it made into a major motion picture and sell millions of copies. But realistically, success comes on a much more personal, one-to-one type level. And it's been immensely gratifying to me. I mean, I said that I've always wanted to write a novel. Now, having done that, it's just this wonderful feeling that I've done what I was supposed to do.
I certainly agree with that. I think it is so gratifying. And my favorite part of writing my books has been hearing from the people who did love them and sitting in a book club, whether on Zoom or around the country, and listening to people discuss my books. And they treat authors like the celebrities, that are in Hollywood, because we did the same thing. I've been in a book club for 30 years, and we've only had one author, speak to our book club. And we do think of authors as celebrities because not everybody can write a book or wants to write a book or should write a book. But it is a very interesting and exciting time in our life.
Yeah, I think having the author at the book group meeting is a win-win for everybody. I think that the authors love it. It's a huge ego trip. And it's fun for the people that have read the book to say, well, why did you do such and such? And is this part true, or did you make this up?
Yes, they have discovered things in my book that I really didn't intend for them to discover, or they've made up things that I didn't know that I led them down that path. So it's been so interesting.
Yeah, I had the experience of I was at a book group meeting, and there's a character in my book who's a black maid named Bet. And someone who was in this meeting said, the reason that Bet spends so much more time with one of these boys than the other is because she recognizes that his mother can't take care of him. And I went, huh. It was like a little revelation to me, but it's great. I mean, that's what characters are supposed to do. They're supposed to have lives of their own. And I was delighted that she had found a motivation for Bet that I wasn't fully aware of.
Readers really do bring them to life.
Yeah.
What do you think was the most challenging part of your artistic process?
I think the most challenging part is to keep going. I mean, everybody's going to have a day when they write something and you go back and you read it and you think, well, this is not very good. And then you start thinking, well, I'm a fraud anyway. I shouldn't be doing this. So the hard part is to keep going day after day. And, I had an experience where I wrote an entire novel, found an editor to look at it, and she said, this is not going to work. And I said, well, how much do you think we can keep? And she said, 10%.
Oh,
So
it's
you
brutal.
got to
It's
pick
a
yourself up.
brutal
Yeah, it was
industry.
brutal.
Well, I love titles that I can't quite figure out, but sometimes I think I know the meaning to them. What does your title mean?
So the name of the book is Never. And the origin of that title is that in Selma, the white sheriff of Dallas County, which is the county that Selma was in, he would go to press conferences wearing a pin that said never in all caps, as in we will never integrate. We will always be segregated. And when I read that, I thought, that's got to be the title of my book, because that is just such a condensed expression of belligerence that it just works. Another way that it worked for me was that when the story begins, the author's sister is saying, I'm worried about how we're going to be perceived as segregationists. And the narrator pushes back and says, this maid, she was part of our family. We loved her and she loved us. And even as he's saying it, he's recognizing that it can't be true. And so you can sometimes say that never really happened, meaning your version of events is not true. And I think that one thing that's going on in this story is the narrator is realizing that the story he's always told himself never really happened. And he's got to go back and figure out what did happen.
So interesting. You're getting into our psyches there.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage that you brought to share today and then read so we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay. So the book is narrated by an old man who's remembering one summer from 1962 when he was 12 years old. And his father grew up in rural South Georgia in the 30s on a farm. So you can imagine somebody growing up in the Great Depression on a farm in South Georgia, what their attitudes are going to be towards race. I mean, he remembers his father as definitely not being enlightened on the subject of race. But his father grew up on a farm playing with a black boy whose family worked the farm. And he called this boy brother. And what the narrator remembers about his own childhood is that they would go back to visit his uncle on the farm, and his father would always say, "We need to go see brother." And so you have this contradictory situation where he knows his father was a racist, and yet he also knows that his father really liked this guy named Brother. Brother is a minor character, so I don't think I'm spoiling things to tell you that Brother dies in an accident. And the father finds out about this by getting a phone call, and he goes to the back of the house to take the call. And Little's mother tells him after a while to go back and check on her father and make sure that he's okay. And he finds his father out behind the house in the backyard. And so the passage I'm going to read is just part of the conversation that he has with his father after his father has discovered that brother has died. It was getting darker by the minute, the bats more difficult to see, the stars emerging as if rising from the depths. "This is going to be a difficult thing for Gladys," he said. Gladys was Brother's wife, a lighter-skinned woman who hung back when my father was around. Brother's children never seemed to interest my father much. He couldn't remember their names or even how many Brother had, whereas my mother asked after each by name and knew their ages too. Gladys can't have an extra dime living the way they do, and she still has those children to raise. She'll have to find another place. Brother's family has been in that house ever since my grandfather bought that farm. For all I know, Brother's folks came with the package. Bob isn't going to force them out. He's not that hard. But he won't want them living there with no way to pay the rent or help with the farm work. You won't have to push. Gladys, she'll know. The cadence of his words was deliberate, as if he were crossing a stream on stones. I'll take care of her, though. Brother would have known that I wouldn't let his wife and children go hungry. He was a proud man. I bet you didn't know that, did you? Living out on a farm that way, the way he does or did, you would never think he was proud, but he was. Proud of his wife, of his children, proud of his work. That's what made him so valuable to Bob. Any job Brother took on, he took pride in it. If he was going to fix a tractor, that tractor was going to stay fixed by God. It was dark now. My father's features obscured, but I could sense him shaking his head, could feel it in his words. Brother was the product of a different era. People these days don't understand that. All this talk about dignity, as if a man like Brother didn't have any because of where he lived, how he acted. He had plenty, though. He earned it through his work. That farm is Brother's farm. Bob owns it all right, but Brother ran it. And I don't know what Bob is going to do now that Brother is, well, it won't be the same. The chorus of night bugs and frogs pulsed from the bushes and trees, the music thick in the humid air. Are you going to the funeral, Daddy? I asked. No. The air felt sultry and dense, the thrumming bugs everywhere and close. That's no place for me. Gladys would rather be left alone to remember brother and grieve for him in her own way without having to deal with someone like me. Bob told me where they took him, and I'll call down there tomorrow and pay for the arrangements. Your mother will send some flowers. I had never seen my father weep, and I cannot say I saw it then. It was dark, and I looked away, but I heard him, an awful sound.
Oh, Joel, you have sent me right back crashing into my childhood in the 60s. That's so poignant.
Right. Thank you.
So complex. I mean, the issues of race, just so complex. The people that we did love and the people we thought loved us, and whether we really did or not. I mean, those are very, very important issues.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you've raised is one thing that he's doing in this story is he's remembering this black maid. He knows he loved her, and the question is, did she love him?
Yeah.
And, in writing the story, I really had a lot of issues about what can I, as a white man, say about the experience of this black woman in the segregated South. And where I came out was thinking that all the narrator can do is speculate about how she might have thought and come up with his own reasons for why she acts as she did. I think that in these days, while you want to have artistic freedom, I think that a white man really shouldn't be in the position of trying to speak for this black character. So instead, I just had the author speculate but not know how she thought and felt.
Well, it brings up a lot of emotions for me because I did have a black woman living in my house, and she became mother to me because my mother was so often gone and sick and in and out of hospitals. And her daughter and I are still in contact and call each other sister. But, the young African Americans today would look down on her occupation of being a domestic servant. But in the South, in a very small town, she didn't have any choices to support her family. And she taught 3 little white children civil rights from the inside out. And I could never go outside that house and hate someone for the color of their skin because of the woman that I loved who had that color skin.
That's a great story. Yeah, and that's a complex story to tell, right? I mean, there are a lot of different layers to that story in terms of how she was treated, how she treated you, what she told you, what she told her own children. There are layers upon layers there.
Absolutely. Well, do you have any other books in you?
Yeah, I think so. You know, in doing retirement planning, I found myself on a website a week ago where you can do a life expectancy calculator. I don't know if you've ever done this, but insurance companies will do this. And you enter your age, your weight, whether you smoke, and it tells you what your median life expectancy is. Mine is until the mid 90s.
Wow, you have good genes. I don't know that I have that good of genes.
Well, you should do it. It changes your perspective. I mean, can I write another book in the next 25 years? Yeah, I should be able to do that, right?
Yes, you can, because I'm interviewing people in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. And next month, I'm interviewing a woman who is 101.
I will tune in for that. That will be interesting.
What does your family think about your new career as a writer?
Uh, there are really 2 families to think about. One is my family with my children. I think they're all very enthusiastic about it. I think that probably 2 of my children at least would like to write novels themselves, and so I think that they won't have my experience of thinking the only writers are William Faulkner. I mean, they see this very fallible parent writing a novel, which maybe makes it more achievable. It was also interesting to see how my siblings reacted to this story. I changed a lot. Nevertheless, you can recognize elements of our childhood in the story, and it was fun to see how they responded to it.
Well, at least it's not a memoir and you're not spilling all the family secrets.
Yeah, I think that I would freeze up trying to write a memoir. I mean, something about saying that it's fiction gives me the freedom to say what I want to say. Much more difficult to describe what my mother was really like or what my father was really like.
Yes, I'm told by the authors I interview who've written memoirs that it's therapy putting your words down on paper, but that it also causes problems in some families
Yeah.
who don't want their family's legacy spread across the pages of a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I said, I lived in a pretty stable family, so I don't think there are a lot of crimes to expose in my past.
What about publicity for your book? You know, we writers like to write. We don't like to promote ourselves very well. Have you been doing anything post publication that you can share? Maybe something that worked or maybe something you tried that didn't work?
Um, I think that the most uh, rewarding experiences so far have been the book groups. And I get into those book groups through friends and friends of friends. They are 90% women, I would say. And I'll participate in those book groups. And if people say that they like the book, I will encourage them to post a review on Amazon. And so now I've gotten to the point where I have a lot of favorable reviews on that page on Amazon. So my challenge is, how do I get people to go to that page? I'm thinking that I may do some advertising. I haven't tried advertising so far, but if you could imagine an ideal situation that everybody who looked at To Kill a Mockingbird, if they saw some little ad that said, readers who like To Kill a Mockingbird also like Never, that'd be pretty on target advertising. So I may do something like that. I've done some readings with mixed success. I did one in a library where two people showed up. One was a friend of mine. The other one was a library employee. They told her to go sit in the room because nobody was sitting in there. So I wouldn't put that down as a real triumph. A friend of mine has a daughter who's very successful on social media, and she told me that I should be posting on TikTok. But I look at TikTok; it is just so alien to me and the way I think that I just have not yet had the courage to go there.
Well, I find that I like Instagram and Facebook more than TikTok because it just seems so chaotic to me. But maybe it's our age group that like more photos. But if you get a review on Amazon that says that if they read Mockingbird, they need to read your book, I would be using that quote directly in an ad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, this has been a great visit with you today, Joel. And as always, our last interview question on Authors Over 50 is, our writers over 50 are a unique set. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
My experience was that the way to do it was just to sit down and start doing it. So I would say my advice is, instead of getting more advice, just start writing. And you don't have to know where it's going or how it's going to turn out. You just need to start getting the words on the page.
That's great advice, and I really appreciate your being here to share with us today. I think you've lost a lot of your Southern accent, unlike me, but living in Massachusetts might do that for you. I'm here in Texas, and everybody thinks that I sound Texan, which I assure them I do not. I sound like I'm from the deep South, but I appreciate your being here and sharing your story, because it's really going to touch a lot of us, especially those little white children who lived in the South and who are still trying to figure it all out, and what happened in our childhoods, and how we can take that and grow from it and do better. So thank you for being here. We appreciate you, and we're happy to count you among our authors over 50.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend, and check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.